The first sound he heard was not her voice, but the way the wind recoiled when she breathed. A sharp hitch that cut across the prairie like a blade dragged backward, and when the rancher knelt in the brittle grass, he understood that pain could be a language all its own, because the woman bound between the posts did not cry out. She only whispered, "Don't. It still hurts there," as if the land itself had touched her wrong and remembered. Elias Crow had seen bodies broken by rope, iron, hunger, and worse. But this was different, because she was enormous in a way that made the world look too small for her. Shoulders broad as a wagon gate, legs long and corded like they had been shaped by climbing stone instead of walking earth, her skin marked by old scars that did not beg pity but told stories no white man had been invited to hear. And yet here she was, Apache by the cut of her face and the braids dragged loose by days of capture, lowered into the dust like a beast set for slaughter. And still the first thing she asked for was mercy for a place that already ached. Elias did not touch her at first because touching meant choosing, and choosing meant crossing a line he had spent years pretending was still visible. But he could not stop watching the way her fingers clawed the ground when the rope at her ankles shifted, the way her jaw locked to keep a scream from escaping, and the way her eyes, dark, steady, furious even through pain, tracked his movements as if weighing the cost of trusting a man whose kind had never paid their debts. He remembered his father's voice telling him the West was built by men who learned to look away, and he remembered his own voice years later when he swore he would never be one of them, but oaths rot faster than bones in this country. And now the choice lay breathing in front of him, tied to posts driven by hands that had fled when the work of cruelty was done. The horse behind him stamped and snorted, uneasy, as if it too felt the wrongness of a woman left like this beneath an open sky, and Elias finally moved, slow as dusk, setting his hat aside, raising his hands where she could see them, his palms empty except for the tremor he could not hide, and he told her his name even though she had not asked, because names were a kind of bridge, and bridges were all he had left. She did not answer with hers, only watched him with an expression carved from endurance, and when he reached for the knot at her ankle, she hissed that warning again. Not loud, not pleading, just honest, and he felt it settle in his chest like a debt he could never repay. He worked the rope loose inch by inch, feeling the fibers bite his fingers, the sun burning his neck, the silence growing heavier with every breath she took. And as circulation crept back into her legs, she shuddered, not weakly, but with the force of a storm held too long behind mountains. And Elias understood then that she was not small inside herself, despite the way men had tried to make her so. He thought of the rumors that drifted through border towns, stories of a giant Apache woman who could lift a man with one arm and snap his pride with the other, a spirit of the high mesas, a shadow that followed raiding parties like judgment. And he wondered how many lies it took to turn a person into a monster worth chaining to posts. When the last knot fell free, she collapsed forward onto her hands, breath ragged, shoulders shaking, and Elias reached out before he could stop himself, steadying her back, feeling heat and strength and life under his palm. And the moment stretched thin as wire, because she went still, every muscle coiled, and for a heartbeat he was sure she would strike him down and be right to do so. Instead, she whispered again, "There." A single word weighted with memory, and he followed her gaze to a dark stain in the grass where blood had soaked deep. And something inside him broke open because he knew then this was not the first place she had been hurt, only the last she remembered. He told her he could take her to water, to shade, to a doctor if she would let him, and the words sounded small against the horizon, but they were all he had to offer. And when she finally spoke more than a warning, her voice carried the gravity of stones sliding into place, telling him that men who did this would come back, that they always did, that mercy was a thing the plains pretended to understand but never practiced. And Elias felt the old weight of regret settle across his shoulders, the regret of every time he had ridden past someone else's suffering and called it survival. He cut the ropes from the posts and dragged them away, as if distance could undo what had been done. And as he helped her rise, he realized how tall she truly was, how the sun caught in her hair and turned it to fire, how the scars along her arms did not diminish her, but made her seem carved from the same hard truth as the land itself. She stood unsteadily, leaning on him despite herself, and the horse quieted, as if recognizing something older than fear. And for a fleeting moment, Elias imagined a different ending to his life, one where he did not die alone under a sky that did not know his name. Then she stiffened, her eyes cutting past him to the far rise where dust lifted in a thin, deliberate line, and the tension snapped tight because the past was riding back toward them, patient and armed, and Elias knew that whatever he chose next would decide not only whether she lived, but whether he deserved to. The dust line grew teeth as it came closer, riders resolving out of heat haze like bad memories refusing to stay buried. And Elias Crow felt the old arithmetic of violence begin to tally itself inside him. The count of bullets, the weight of distance, the time it would take regret to become permanent. While beside him, the Apache woman, whose name he finally learned when she spoke it like a vow, Taza-Lin, meaning stone that remembers, shifted her stance despite the pain, drawing herself upright, until the wind had to go around her, and in that moment, Elias understood that survival was not always flight, but sometimes the courage to stand where the ground had already tasted your blood and refused to move. He guided her toward the low rise where scrub and broken earth might give cover, the horse sensing urgency and obeying without question. And as the first shots cracked the air, Elias returned fire, not with fury but with precision, born of too many winters spent watching men die for less, each report echoing off the open land like a verdict, while Taza-Lin moved with him in a way that felt less like coordination and more like fate tightening its grip, her long reach steadying him when he slipped, her breath a rasp he matched with his own, both of them stitched together by necessity and something deeper neither dared name. When one rider broke off the flank, she went after him without waiting for permission, pain forgotten or simply set aside, and Elias saw the truth of the stories then. Not the monstrous lies, but the harder truth of a woman who had been shaped by loss into something unbreakable, who struck not from rage but from a fierce clarity that left no room for mercy she had never been shown. And when the dust finally settled, there were no cheers, only the sound of wind returning to itself and the distant caw of a bird brave enough to witness aftermath. Elias found her kneeling where the blood had darkened the soil again, this time not hers alone. And when he touched her shoulder, she did not flinch, only leaned into him as if the earth had shifted and he was the one thing still solid. And in that closeness, he felt the weight of every choice he had avoided until now pressed down and ask its price. He told her he would take her south to a place he knew where the land opened into canyons that hid springs and memory alike, where no man rode unless he belonged or wished not to return. And she listened with eyes that measured truth by tone rather than promise. Then told him that paths taken together were heavier but truer, that survival without witness was only another kind of dying, and Elias felt the last of his old life loosen its hold. They rode at dusk, the sky bruised purple and gold, and though her pain slowed them, she did not complain, speaking instead of her people with a voice that carried grief without surrender, of a mother lost to winter, of a brother who sang to the stars before the soldiers came, and Elias answered with his own confessions, of a wife buried under a cottonwood, of years spent believing isolation was penance enough, and somewhere between those truths something like love took root, not tender or easy, but real as calloused hands. By the time they reached the canyon, night had folded the world into shadow, and as they made camp, Elias realized he was no longer afraid of the silence, because it was shared, because it held a future that did not require forgetting. And when Taza-Lin finally slept, her breathing steady, he kept watch not out of duty but gratitude, knowing that whatever tomorrow demanded, he would meet it facing forward. At dawn she woke and stood without help, scars and all, and the land seemed to recognize her, the way the light caught her form like an answer long awaited. And Elias knew then that destiny was not a chain but a crossing, a place where two broken paths met and chose to continue. If this tale has carried you across dust and pain into something earned, if it has reminded you that even in the hardest country compassion can still carve a road, then remember, the Western tales as you ride on. Stand with us by subscribing so these stories keep breathing, because legends only survive when someone is willing to listen, and this land still has many truths left to tell.